I loved my job. I was a watchman at a wind farm. My only job was to do rounds at night, to make sure no one went near the turbines. I read lots of books, and if I got bored, I took my portable DVD player to watch movies during the night. Only the patrols interrupted my time. I arrived every night at 9, and was relieved at 9 in the morning. It was easy. I met the watchman from the previous shift. We would say hello. He would tell me if anything had happened, and he would leave. He would not usually tell me more than if he had seen a deer, or maybe a bear. There were a dozen windmills spread over 8 kilometers, connected by a dirt road. At first I would check the locks on each windmill, but after 5 years I would just drive by and barely glance at them. Most of the time I would still watch my movie while I drove the road. It was very quiet. Only once I went down in a ditch, but I was able to get the car out without much trouble. The worst thing was the embarrassment one afternoon I arrived in a hurry. Just in time for my turn, I received the report and started my routine. I did my first round without problems, the sky. It was already dark, and it looked like it was going to rain. I saw a flock of turkeys crossing the road, which was a sign of a storm. My first lap was calm. I saw nothing strange, not even the usual animals except the turkeys. Probably the others had taken shelter from the storm. The 8-kilometer route lasted about 30 minutes. We were not allowed to go fast, and technically we had to check the doors of the wind turbines, although most of us timed the time so that it looked like we were doing it. I returned to the main building. Shortly after 99:30, I took out my DVD player and started watching Die Hard. Of course I fell asleep. I woke up with the credits on the screen. I cursed, remembering that I had lost the round. I started the car and quickly left for the wind turbines. Then I remembered something low-fuel light was blinking. I cursed myself for not refueling earlier. I thought I would have enough gas to get through the night and get to a gas station by dawn. The second round was smooth, but I kept looking at the fuel gauge. There was not much I could do about it. If you were caught driving out of turn, you were fired, so I stayed. Although I was tempted a couple of times to make a quick 3-kilometer trip to the gas station, the problem was my boss was a nasty guy, and he liked to do surprise inspections at any time. He would pretend to come to see if I needed anything, but I knew the real reason if he showed up that night. I would ask for some gas to avoid inspecting so often in the middle of my second movie, Die Hard. Too obviously I left for another music round. It had started to rain and the defroster on the car was not working well by my 4th round. The rain had intensified so much it looked like a deluge I could barely see and had to drive slowly. The dirt road had huge puddles. I was glad to be in a 4x4. I drove into one of those puddles when the car stopped. I tried to start it several times, but nothing. I was out of gas. I was not going to forget it. I could picture the others telling the story of the fool who ran out of gas in the middle of a storm. Now I had to decide, should I stay in the car or walk to the main building? There were almost 8 hours left until my relief, and with the rain it was impossible to walk back. If there had been an emergency can of gas, I would have encouraged, but it had been empty for a long time, courtesy of my boss, who said it was a waste. I decided not to. So I turned off the car and sat listening to the rain hitting the roof. Then my mind started playing tricks on me. As it whistled an out-of-tune tune, I looked in the rearview mirror and swore. I saw eyes staring at me from the back window. I turned so fast my neck hurt, but there was nothing. I locked the doors as if that would help. In the middle of nowhere, and with the storm outside, my whistling got louder as I avoided looking in the mirror. I finally couldn't resist, and I did it. There was nothing. I laughed nervously at being so dumb and leaned my head back on the headrest. I don't remember falling asleep, but I do remember waking up to nothing. Not the sound of the rain, nor the sound of animals, not even the sound of crickets. It was unnerving. I rolled the window down a few inches and heard, still. No, there was no sound. Not even the blades of the wind turbines as they turned. I looked at the nearest one, and the blades were still. It was not common for the wind to be so calm that it could not make the blades turn. I looked at my watch and saw that I had slept for 4 hours. The storm clouds had dissipated, and the moon had risen. It was not LL, but it was bright enough to light up the ground and create hundreds of shadows between the trees that surrounded me. It was a beautiful night, the kind of night that I have. Feeling lucky to live in rural Pennsylvania made me seriously reconsider the idea of staying in the truck. Until the next morning, my mind debated, as I hummed, should I stay or should I go? I looked back at the clock. In less than 4 hours, my relief would arrive. What would he do if I wasn't there? It would be much easier to explain to him and have him go get gas for me than wait for him to make his first round and find me sitting in the middle of the road. I made the decision. I took the flashlight out of the glove compartment and stayed a while. The gun I had next to me thought it over, but decided to leave it. Most of the animals in this forest don't want anything to do with humans, and those that do are easily scared away with a little scream. I slammed the door on my way out, and my foot fell into a deep puddle. I sighed as the water rose beyond my ankle and soaked my shoe. The puddle surrounded the entire vehicle. It was easily 3, met wide. I knew that jumping on one foot would only serve to wet my clothes, so I put the second foot and closed the door. I began to walk through the puddle towards the other side until I reached dry ground. I pointed the flashlight at the nearest wind turbine. The number CCO I knew was the furthest from the entrance. It was halfway, so it did not matter if I went forward or backward. I decided to continue, and I began to walk. During the first part of my journey, the only sound I heard was that of my shoes splashing. It was strange to have, as my only company, the absolute silence and the shadows projected by the trees. I illuminated with the flashlight between the trees, and I saw several eyes that looked at me, but they were silent. It was as if they were sitting in the pews of a church, and I walked down the hall, looking for my seat. The size of the eyes varied, some small and some quite large, but none made any sound. They really feared me. I stopped to rest, and it was then when I heard it, a footstep behind me. It was not a loud thud, but the soft crunch of grass under a large foot. I turned quickly and pointed the light towards the place where I thought I had heard the sound, but there was nothing. I moved the light in all directions, but all I saw was a gravel path and an infinity of trees. Seeing nothing was perhaps worse than seeing something: a deer, a bear, even a coyote. They would have been something I could deal with, scare away or face. But nothing. That emptiness was filled by my mind with all kinds of horrible creatures. The eerie silence continued as I began to walk faster. Without realizing, even the sound of my shoes seemed louder in the absence of the noises of the forest. I began to think about my destination. It was tempting to cut through the forest and save myself a lot of time. Since the road made a long detour, if it had been daytime, I might have considered it the middle of the night, with the almost full moon over my shoulder, and hours before dawn. I didn't even think twice. I thought maybe whistling would calm my nerves. I tried to whistle the happiest tune I could remember, but the echo came back distorted like a children's song in a horror movie. I stopped whistling almost immediately. I was halfway through a verse when the tune died on my lips. The unexpected silence brought me the terrifying gift of another step behind me. I turned around as quickly as I could and shined the flashlight. This time my mind didn't have a chance to scare me with anything. This time I saw some. They were big and red, but the most disturbing thing was the height at which that they were out, whatever their eyes were. They were about 2 meters from the ground. It was about 40 or 50 meters from hiding behind a tree. But those eyes will haunt me for the rest of my life. Unfortunately, I didn't know how long it would be, especially with such a monstrously large creature stalking me. I would like to say that I analyzed my options carefully and came to a logical solution about what that creature was and how to deal with it. But it didn't. I ran as if it was chasing me itself. I was surprised not to lose the flashlight. I found a speed. I didn't know I had desperation achieved, that my mind was going faster than my feet. But I couldn't find any solution. I could hear the footsteps behind me, getting closer and closer. It was going to catch up with me. It was only a matter of time while my mind clung to any idea. My salvation rose in front of me, like a beacon for a lost sailor. One of the wind turbines, he got up in front of me. He knew the code to enter in case of emergency and to turn it off. I didn't think I could run any faster, but when I heard the footsteps behind me and saw my salvation in front of me, I pushed myself like a runner in the final stretch. Of course, all that was in my head. Reality destroyed that illusion when the sound of those huge feet got closer. I no longer cared about being quiet. Now I heard it clearly on the gravel road. My curiosity wanted to turn around and see my pursuer, but I forced myself to conceive into what was in front of me, stumbled, because I was distracted, or stopped to see the creature would be my doom. The huge monolith of more than 100 meters high rose in front of me. I could already visualize where the keyboard was, knowing that I would have only one chance to enter the code before it reached me. As I approached, the panic grew. I was obsessed with the idea that it would catch me at any moment. I do not know what prompted me to do it. In addition to terror and desperation, I took the only thing I had at hand, my flashlight, and threw it back. By some miracle, I heard a thud and a slight moan. The sound came from much closer than I wanted, but still I refused to look back. I reached the door of the turbine. I entered the code and opened it with a jerk. Using all my strength, as soon as I crossed, I slammed the door. Just before a pair of huge fingers closed, appeared on the threshold. I pulled with all my strength, feeling my muscles tense to the maximum. Somehow the door continued closing. The fingers disappeared, and I heard an inhuman scream from the other side. As I locked the door, I collapsed, panting, while my mind repeated the image of those fingers appearing on the door. Like a frozen image, I saw with clearness that the fingers were huge, covered in brown hair, and with sharp claws. I lay on the ground, breathing with difficulty, looking for some option but not finding any. For the moment I felt safe. But how long would it last? Would someone find me here? Even think I was lost in the woods, and the most terrifying question, what the hell was that thing? I didn't want to speculate. because the possible answers were too terrifying, especially with that thing still lurking around near me just as I began to feel the adrenaline drop. I heard knocks on the door echoed in the giant and hollow tube that was now my refuge and my prison. I jumped up, not knowing what to do. My only escape route was leading me to the claws of a monster. I looked around looking for help, but not finding it. I resigned myself to wait for my disappearance. The door vibrated with each knock. I knew it was made of strong metal, but even metal has its limits. As I walked through the small room barely 3 meters wide, my eyes fell on the ceiling. There on one side was a staircase. It extended upwards, seeming to have no end. Although there were lights every few meters, they gave me no comfort. I asked myself what options I had. Wait for the door to collapse, or climb an endless staircase with no resting points, without pauses, without turning back. If I went up, there was no margin of error. Giving up halfway only meant that I would have to return to my desperate situation. I had no idea if I had the strength or stamina for such a climb. But the knocks on the door forced me to decide. I climbed the stairs cautiously, as if waiting for the step to give way under my foot. After a moment, I climbed to the second, and then to the third. The fourth step was about to be fatal. I slipped and fell to the ground, falling in a puddle. It reminded me painfully that my shoes were. Although there were non-slip pads on the steps, I had to step carefully using the arch of the foot. Not the sole. I got up and checked if I had hurt myself. I knew I would have a couple of bruises and would survive. But the only thing hurt was my pride. The knocks on the door brought me back to reality. I got up and started climbing the stairs again, this time with more caution. I moved slowly, making sure that each step was sure. Over time I gained confidence and I climbed a little faster. My breathing became labored as the effort drained my energy. I regretted skipping dinner and not having any snacks. I paused, hooking my arm on the ladder to keep from falling while I caught my breath. It was then that I made 2 mistakes. I looked up and then back up. It seemed that the top was still as far away as when I started down. I saw that I had climbed enough to die if I fell. But I also saw something else that made me. There were several safety harnesses hanging on the wall. Next to the ladder, a metal cable ran all the way. For a moment, I considered going back down for a harness, but I realized that I might not have the energy to go back up. The rest of the climb seemed eternal. My breaks were more frequent and longer. My feet cried out for an almost exhausted breath. I looked up and saw the end of the staircase. The emotion propelled me the last meters. I fell metallically, staying there for what seemed like an eternity until I regained my strength. I went through the door that led to the generator room. The space was narrow, dominated by the machinery. There was a small walkway next to the generator and a hatch that led to the outside. I looked around and found safety equipment. I put it on, and let's make sure I was wrapped in a calm feeling. But I didn't notice the wind that was whipping hard. After the storm threatening to make me lose my balance, I stumbled and was thankful to have the safety rope. One of the huge blades passed a few meters from me. I wanted to look down to see if my pursuer had disappeared. I looked out carefully, fighting against vertigo. At first glance, everything seemed normal, but then I noticed a movement. It was the creature that was turning around from the other side of the base of the turbine. I was amazed at how small it looked from that height, but I still had the same dilemma: how to escape. I went back inside and looked for a solution. I found a radio in the wall. Controls, I tried a button and an alarm sounded, which I silenced instantly. Then I tried another button, listening to static. Hello? Is anyone listening to me? I asked the microphone. I repeated it 2 more times until my boss answered what you do in one of the units. It was an emergency, and it was the only way to contact someone. I said, what emergency? I prefer not to say it over the radio. Can you come and get me? He sighed in, what unit are you at 6? I will be a little while. What will you know when he growled? Relief overcame me. I knew someone would come out of curiosity. I peeked again and what I saw froze my blood. The creature was looking at me. I had heard the alarm. Then it began to climb the turbine. My eyes were caught in that eerie sight. I expected it to fall, but it didn't. It was getting closer and closer. My mind reacted and put my body in motion. I threw myself inside and closed the hatch. I released the safety rope and ran towards the main staircase. I descended much faster then. When I went up, several slips almost led me to a fatal fall. In the end, I reached the ground. The blows in the turbine was deafening. I opened the door as quietly as possible, hoping the noise of the creature would cover my exit. When the door creaked, the noise in the turbine stopped. My heart rose to my throat. A smell of smoke reached me. I looked up and saw black plumes. The turbine. I ran to my Jeep without looking back. Despite hearing a roar, I almost crashed into my boss's car as I turned the corner. What the hell is going on? He said, getting down. Look, I yelled, pointing at the turbine. I see it. He replied, what did you do? Don't look closely, I insisted, pointing at the black smoke. What do you expect me to see other than millions of dollars turning into smoke? I stopped and looked at the burning machine. There was no creature. I got in the car, slamming the door shut. We can go now. I asked him, trying to hide my terror. He looked at me, got in the car, and drove to the main building all the way. I didn't stop watching in the rearview mirror. When we got there, he looked at me. You'll have to answer some questions. I know they could. Look for my car. I ran out of gas. That's why I was in the turbine. Why didn't you wait in the car? I opened my mouth to answer, but I stopped. Okay, he said, getting out. I'll send someone to get your car. I followed him inside and lay down on the couch in the break room. Later, a colleague woke me up. Here are your keys. Car, it's parked outside. The boss wants to see you. I took the keys and stood up. I looked towards the boss's office to my right, then to the left towards the exit. In an instant, I decided to turn left and walk out the door. I never went back, but the memory of that night has never left me. The next day, I read in the newspaper about the turbine fire and how they found the corpse of a bear trapped in the flames. But I knew the truth.